You are watching the art of pressing play.
You're watching.
You are watching
The art of pressing play.
the art of pressing play.
You are watching the art of pressing play.
So far, we explored the realm of what electronic music is, the history of the scene's growth in Calgary, and the rich realm of the DJ. Today, the question is, what is modular synthesis? First of all, what is a synthesizer? A synthesizer, or synth, is an electronic instrument or machine that uses a form of processing to create sound. The sounds can range from a classical piano to a deep bass line that sounds completely alien. This range of sound happens from manipulating different signals. As you might remember from the Magic School Bus, sound is produced in waves. To keep this explanation simple, I won't discuss the science behind sound waves, but just talk about the waves themselves. Now back to musical sound waves, or waveforms. What common types are there, and what do they sound like? There's a sine wave, a sawtooth wave, a square wave, and a triangle wave. A synthesizer is able to generate these waves to create a tone, and it does that with something called an oscillator. Modular synthesis uses different machines to manipulate these waves to create all sorts of sounds. Now let's pause here and talk about modular synthesis with a couple of artists that specialize in this field.
My name is John Darkarps. I'm an electronic music producer and video producer, motion graphics artist, and general technologist. I've been producing electronic music since 1997.
My name is Ryan Hall, aka Soulier. I'm a live electronic music artist who mainly works in modular synthesis and improvised sets.
It was super helpful to break things down into categories because obviously it's incredibly overwhelming, all the different modules out there, and you don't really know what they do when you're learning modular. So it's, in my mind, very useful to kind of put them into different categories. And I suppose those categories would be, you have sound generation. So that could be an oscillator or a sampler of some kind. So it's either, synthetically generating a waveform for you, or it's playing back a pre-recorded sound. And, built into these modules are all these modulators, ways of interacting with the sound. But at a core level, it is generating a waveform, or it's generating a sound for you. So that's kind of, you could put those over here on the left. And then I guess next is modulators, things whose job it is are to control other aspects of other modules and aren't really about generating sounds themselves. Although sometimes certain modulators can generate sounds because of how fast they can oscillate. Because effectively, like, everything is just producing voltage. It's all of it is just voltage. It's just, extremely complex and extremely fast. So, math, make noise math is the universally accepted most badass modulator on the market, and always has been. And it is for a number of reasons that'll be too complicated to try and explain. But, fundamentally, it's got two LFOs in it, or envelope generators, which will cycle. But the point is that they are modulators in that they will produce control voltage at their outputs, which you can then send somewhere else. For example, the pitch of an oscillator, so you send to one of your sound generators to modulate or to modify the sound in some way. And again, there are a bazillion different types of modulators out there, but the main things are that they are either envelopes or LFOs. They cycle. They either cycle or they do this one thing once. Then you have things like, sound shaping. So things like filters, distortion, and then, effects. And most, by effects, I think I mean more time-based effects like delays and reverbs rather than distortions or ring modulations and stuff like that. That's more sound shaping in my opinion. So time-based effects, either delays or reverbs, are kind of, they're totally essential really, I think, in sound design, particularly when it comes to delays. It imparts a rhythmic aspect, which is very sort of enticing or very attractive in music in general. So yeah, sound generation, modulation, filtering, or sound shaping, and effects. I think I think you could pretty much put any module into one of those categories.
I like to think of it as like if you took if you just took a off-the-shelf synthesizer and then you split every component of it into individual parts, and then you took another synthesizer and did the same thing, and then you said, oh, I want to use a filter from my Moog, but I want to use it with a Roland synth or something like that, and you start to like splice things together, but rather than using large, big brand names who are creating instruments, it's really done by sometimes people in their garage, sometimes through do-it-yourself kits. A lot of really boutique sort of people all over the world now are making modules, which are whether it's an oscillator, a filter, an envelope, random control voltage, sequencers, and all sorts of things. It's crazy how much stuff is out there right now. And so you take each component you think that you'll be able to work with, and then essentially build your own synthesizer out of it.
Now that some definitions have been cleared up, let's dive into what kind of setups are made to create music with modular synthesis.
My name is Justin. I perform electronic music under the name WaveState, and that's what I do. I make improvised music with modular synths.
My name is Robert Adriansons, also known as Robert Alexander. I have been an electronic artist for a better part of 20 years. I started when I was 16 years old on a digital audio workstation. That eventually evolved into diving into hardware instruments, devices like electrons and Rolands and things like that. Now, today, I am working on what's known as a Eurorack modular synthesizer.
There are three things I would say, primarily. Four things, I guess. So one is the actual modular case itself. So that is like two rows of 104 HP with horizontal pitch is how they measured it. And then there's a 1U row, which is like a third of the height of the other rows. So it's 3 rows, one of which is a 1U row. And then that case is full. And then I've got a poly-in tracker that I use for building beats. That's where all my drums come from. It's where the master clock lives. And then I've got a Norns shield and a fader bank that I use to interact with the Norns shield. So the Norns shield is like a beautiful, wonderful community of like people making open source music software for this like tiny box. But like using the tiny box by itself is miserable. Like it's awful to use. And so I like pair it with this fader bank that I built myself. Like it's like a DIY project. And yeah, so that's what I use and I use looper scripts primarily on the Norns. So the setup is the tracker is the beat, and then the synth sort of marches to the same beat the tracker does. And then I like live sample that into the looper, and then build it up and take it down and build it up and take it down. And then in the case itself, there's really only like 2 sound sources, but I can make it sound like 4 voices essentially. And then effects and loads of utilities, like mostly utilities, honestly.
My current setup, it's mostly a drum machine. I use really only about four devices that actually produce sound. One of them is an Endorphin's Queen of Pentacles. The other is a Noise Engineering Bassimilis Ateritas Alter. That's kind of like a FM synth voice. I use a sampler by Make Noise called Morphogene. And also, the other one that I got is a Moog DFAM, which is also, it was intended to be used as drums, but it could be anything from drums to atmospheric pads to FM tones to all different sorts of things. One interesting thing about the DFAM, going more into like using it as an ambient machine, I did a set for a friend in Winnipeg under a different alias, Crayons. And it was for music for bathtubs. That's what it's called. It's meant for, relaxing music. And I didn't really know how to do it because my machines were geared towards more the gritty, textural, harder music for like techno. And I looked at the DFAM and I was like, I bet you I could pull something off with this. So I played around with it a little bit and I ended up producing an entire 45-minute set using just the DFAM and a few effects. It was really, really interesting. You got to break your instruments and find out a new way to use them. And that's one of the greatest things about electronic instruments.
It is a pure hardware involving a Soma Labs Pulsar 23 drum machine and a small Euro rack skiff, which contains a morphogene, make noise morphogene, which is a granular sampler, and then a delay reverb unit and a filter. And that's basically it in terms of music generating hardware for my live set. However, I am using a laptop with an Ableton as part of a control system for this lighting prop that I've brought. So I brought this thing. It's basically like a flag. It's like a stick with a square covered with LEDs on it. And using Ableton Live, well, there's a whole like control pipeline going on, effectively starting with control voltage from the drum machines, which are then going into a little MIDI Euro rack device, so it converts CV or gates into MIDI messages. Those MIDI messages are being sent to a Lemur app on an iPad, and also being sent into Ableton Live, which then control a Max for Live patch. So Max for Live is a programming language. Max MSP is a programming language, and they bundled it into Ableton Live. And it allows you to do kind of anything. You could make your own synthesizers, or you could make your own MIDI interface, or you could make, in my case, your own lighting controller. So there's an RGB LED controller that sends messages over OSC, which is a type of messaging protocol similar to MIDI, specifically designed to be sent over IP, which is networking protocol, what your Wi-Fi router uses or anything like that. So those messages are being sent to a little piece of software called processing, which converts those messages into another language that goes into a little device called a pixel pusher, which is what controls the RGB LEDs that are on this flag thing that I've made. Effectively, what's happening is the iPad app is the kind of human-to-machine interface, and the iPad app will show you what is coming into it in terms of like the kick drum or the hi-hat or the envelopes that are coming from Maths, which is one of the modulators that I have in the Euro rack skiff. And so that control data is coming into Lemur, and then you can decide where this control data is going to in order to control the light. So will it control the luminosity of the lights? Will it control the color or how fast they flash, or the kind of cutoff points for the lower and upper divisions, because there's 3 zones with different colors in each zone. So yeah, that's a really long-winded way of saying that there is no software involved in the music side of things tonight, and quite a lot of software involved in the visuals or the lighting side of things. All the pieces of gear that could, that I can realistically bring with me are now in place. So now it's like, well, how do I want to connect them, and what is the approach? What is the systematic approach to playing a set? So I've designed my own cables for this machine, because they intend you to use alligator clips. They have the connections, instead of being jacks like you have on Euro rack, they're actually pins that stick up, and you use alligator clips to clip onto these pins. And that allows you to put multiple connections onto one jack or one pin. The problem is that my fingers are massive, and alligator clips are like really small and kind of slippery. So I made these cables that are just little ring connectors, and I can just kind of, it's like, Operation, right? It's kind of like playing Operation, except that you actually want to touch the sides, right?
Sounds like a
It's the most exciting game of Operation I have ever played.
So it's kind of evolved. There's been a lot of buying and selling over the years, and lately I've got I call it the wall of sound, which is got you know, I quite like mutable instruments gear. It's got some live wire electronics gear in it, and some Moog components, and then just a lot of random things I've found through watching other artists. That's really the best way to kind of learn about what you want to do with it, and find artists who might be on YouTube and discovering their own gear and learning about what they're using. And there's a great online tool called Modular Grid where you can actually design your synth and it has all the components. You just sort of drag and drop, place things to make sure it all fits together. And so it's basically quite a random selection of instruments. And it's at a place right now where I'm pretty happy with the amount of diversity and the amount of tools that I can use to create sound. And sort of that'll be up for a while now, but I'm sure a little bit down the road I'll probably end up doing some buying and trading and end up with another synthesizer, which is going to be completely different.
Ryan, aka Soulier, was kind enough to invite me over to his studio so we could check out the wall of sound. Let's take a look.
So these things can time your effects. If you've got time delay, they can use to run a sequencer, and you can change the division of the beat. If you want it to run sort of like at 60 beats per minute, it would be half of 120, or you can double it. Basically just creating a sine wave right now. And you can change the frequency and tune it. This is the mutable instruments plates. So it's got a bunch of different oscillators that you can change timbre and morph the sound wave on it and add harmonics. So that sounds like. This guy here, so the mutable instruments plates. And so we can tune this. We got frequency. You can morph the timbre and morph the sound wave. Change the sound wave. If you don't want to use your hands to control these, you can plug in a modulation source to it to actually affect things like the timbre. So I have a random control voltage coming from this Chaos computer over here, and it's going to go in and start, when I turn this attenuator up, it's going to start affecting the timbre. And so that's all timed from the clock. And you can attenuate how much of that effect you want, have it go to 0 or just a little bit of that effect, or max it out. And so this is actually being tuned by, it's a kind of a version of a sequencer, which is this guy right here called the Kilpatrick Audio Pattern Generator. And so this is actually made in Canada by a guy, his last name is Kilpatrick, go figure. And so this one's cool because you can set a bunch of different patterns. This window is essentially one of the many patterns that are in here, and you can change the pattern type. And depending on when that red dot hits the red pattern, it'll trigger a note. And so these are all different notes of a scale, and you can have it in a major scale or a minor scale. You can have the motion of that line change based on a bunch of presets. These are all different presets. And so right now it's changed the sequence to run in a more linear pattern up the rows along the x-axis. It's like a little cool like squid alien thingy, like a Atari game or something. And then so there's all sorts of different patterns, and you just play around with it until you find something that's working for you.
Okay, so what are we getting
So-
into today?
You can turn up, there's 4 instruments, so these
Okay.
are all the volume pots. So you can just fade any other one of them in. And then, I mean, for you, I'd say play around with these top 2, play around with this one, play around with, you can play around with the pattern generator.
Okay. God, so many blinking lights. It's like I'm in a candy store or
Yeah.
something. Oh my gosh. Okay, so this.
The bottom one is your, yeah.
And then you said you can click on it to.
Yeah, if you click it, it changes the function, so it'll, they're adding beats right now.
Okay, so you said this one was
That's a pattern generation.
so
and-
pattern type.
Yeah, pattern, you can change the pattern type.
So fascinating. Oh my gosh, this is like I'm on a this is a real spaceship.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, this is the
That's the D fam, so that's this one here. So if you want to change like what's going on with the beat, these are the velocities. So you can see that's a kick. It's going do, do.
okay, okay.
And so you can like turn the velocity up, and the other one is the tuner. So
Oh, interesting. So this is like the good down. Oh, chevrons. Okay, I like the little happy face.
Yeah.
That's cute. Oh my gosh, these are so pretty. I mean, wow, that was like, I made a cool little beat, yay! Thank you for letting me try that out. It's like- I had so much fun jamming at Ryan's studio and playing with the wall of sound. It was truly a fantastic assembly of machines that were both intimidating and fascinating. Our modular artists today have taken us to other worlds with their setups. And as a performer myself, I have to ask, what sort of preparation goes into a performance with equipment that is so unique?
You're not preparing the artistic content, you're preparing the technical system. It's systems design is the way I think about it. I'm building a machine, a way of working with the machines, based on, it really starts with, I know I want to use this. And in the case of this set that I'll be playing, the Pulsar 23, I got this thing a few months ago and kind of immediately realized how incredible it would be as a live tool. And I was like, okay, I'm going to build it around this. And so that became the kind of the core of the whole setup. And then I have a small Eurorack skiff. It's called an IntelliGel palette. It's 64 HP. It's compact. So I was like, well, what can I fit in here? And maths was a kind of an obvious choice because you always need a modulator, and everybody knows maths is like the best module. It's so useful in so many ways. So I was like, okay, well, maths is going in there, and then I need some sort of tone generation. It's either going to be an oscillator or actually much better to use a sampler, because then you have any sound you could possibly want and totally different tones than what the drum machine is able to produce, which is a very synthetic sound. So it's like, well, I know I want to use this and this and this, and okay, now I filled up my, my palette.
I feel through the song more than I program the song. Because I mean, we could always look at, the Western philosophy of making music. You got 4 bars of this, 4 bars of that, chorus, verse, chorus, chorus, But there's little human connection to that. Like it's like when I write a song and I perform a song, I feel the rhythm that I'm making, and I feel when the changes are supposed to happen. I can't do that if everything is set to this has to be this, and this has to be this, this has to be this. Like, it's like after 32 beats, this has to happen. After another 32 beats, this has to happen. No, I find it more hypnotic to be able to feel and connect with people, especially to have them connect to my biorhythms through the music. It's hard to say whether analog or digital is better. They're pretty close nowadays. Like the way that the digital world has evolved, even a lot of modular stuff, a lot of them are also very digital. But the gap has closed so far, and it's not that I prefer the analog over the digital world, it's that I feel a more human connection to the machines in the analog world. I mean, most of the time when I'm recording a song now, I'm not even using an arrangement per se. I don't record each part by itself. I press play on the machines after I develop a pattern or an arrangement, essentially, on the machines, and I perform it. I perform it into a recording, and that's what gets pushed out to streaming services, essentially. I'm very, very improvised. I'll typically have some of my drums kind of laid out, just with basic patterns, and I develop them from there. I mean, beyond that, my synths and the way that I use samples are completely improvised. So I would monitor how my morphogene is doing and take little snips of sounds out of it live and then incorporate it into what's already happening. Because just because the drums are there, I could feel a different groove happening. I mean, whether I'm in the studio or I'm playing on a big system, I mean, the sounds are gonna change a little bit. So being able to adapt to how the room is sounding and how the room is responding, to me, is everything. That's how I connect with them, with the people dancing, with all of that. I'm definitely trying to make them a part of the mood. And you know, you might see me a lot of the times when I'm performing that I have my head down, but I'm always looking at what people are doing, like what people are responding to. Because I mean, part of being a live artist, you always kind of have to look at your gear, because you need to see what's happening, where you are, how the set is going, what patch cable is connected to what. Because I mean, there's probably 70 or 80 cables hooked up to my modular rig at any given time. I mean, when I'm prepping for a live set, I'll typically try to get one groove done a day, essentially. So, you know, if I'm doing an hour set, I might have, you know, 16, 20 different starting points, different kind of bass rhythms. Like usually I'll handle a lot of my polyrhythms ahead of time, because those things, like especially with drums, they have to work, and they're very difficult to improvise on the spot. So I'll typically do one a day, and then after that's all done, I go back and revisit it.
I chose to start performing live with modular for a couple reasons. So it's very difficult in the ways that you mentioned, but it's also extremely immediate, and it really lends itself to being in the moment and playing with it. So playing live with a modular where you have like a very specific thing that you want to do, and you want to make like songs, like typical song structures where, you know, things need to turn on a dime, and you need to have like strong, like, you know, song structures, verse, chorus, verse, whatever. That is like nigh impossible, extremely, extremely difficult. But if you're like willing to kind of have something be a little bit more improvisational, have things, you know, and you have the fortune of having an audience that is willing to, like, you know, just go with what you perform, then it's really incredible, actually. So I'm also a designer sort of in my day job, and so that designer brain like is twofold, really. Like, one, I push pixels all day at work, and so doing anything on a laptop just feels like work to me, and it like immediately strips the joy out of it. And that's my problem. It's not a problem with the laptop. And then two, because design is like a big part of sort of my how I approach everything creatively, and like creating systems that create happy accidents is like something that I really love, and modular is like perfect for that. It's that way by default. Like you get happy accidents whether you like it or not. You get a lot of unhappy accidents too, but like the thing that you're learning isn't to like, you know, have this perfect gesture the way a guitarist would. It's like you create this system where you sort of like work with the machine in a way to like create a thing together, if that makes sense, which is very appealing to me. You create like a set of circumstances, and then you just listen really hard, and then you try not to work against whatever is happening. If it's like it's truly like improvisational that way. In the same way, like improv theater, like you have two people on stage, and you're always trying to like yes and each other. And like it's kind of the same way, but I'm like yes anding a machine that I've set up, and so like I know that it's not going to start reciting Greek poetry to me. You know, like it's going to do things within a certain set of parameters, but I don't know exactly what that is. And so like that, and like that's both. There's a creative risk in that, which is both terrifying and exciting. I feel like audiences can tell, or at least I hope they can. And so like there's an element of like stakes at play.
I used to have, I think when I first started, and I probably locked myself into a lot of preset patterns, drum patterns, and just sort of like, you know, because I use Ableton, you can start to go through scenes, pre-created scenes, and I was doing a lot of that early in my live performance. And then I think as I got more comfortable with the equipment, I started to leave that behind, and then maybe just had you know, a few preset drum patterns, but largely everything else became entirely improvised. And I think that's like, as an artist, you're, at least in my opinion, like for what I like to do, I like the unpredictability, and it can be nerve-wracking going into a live set without any kind of idea of what you're doing. But the more I've done that, and I feel like there's a beauty in the randomness and the unpredictability of a live performance like that. And sometimes you create things based on what the mood of the room is like and the atmosphere, and if people are really feeling something you're doing and dancing to it, you just sort of like take it down that road. Or if it's more of a chill out environment, you can kind of just, you can go down that road if you want. And that's, I think, for me, the beauty of the live improvisation is that dynamic between the artist and the audience, and just going with the flow. Yeah, and that's sort of like, now we've got a thing going, so it's kind of like you just jam out on this a little while.
Tune in to the next episode for a trip inside the box.